Buongiorno everyone, benvenuti a tutti alle Olimpiadi del 20 a Freddo. Mi chiamo Rebecca. I am so excited that everyone is here. Welcome to the Cold Sales Outreach Olympics. My name is Beck. I'm your host for today. I hope everyone is doing good. So we are going to be going into a very, very spicy topic today. And the topic we're going to be going into is sequences. So how to build a sequence and all the steps to it and the 139 different plays that you can build. So if you guys weren't excited about 50 or you weren't excited about 100, well, we have 139 sequences that we are going to go into today. So I hope that everyone is having a great day, and we're going to go ahead and jump into the first lap of this topic. So the head topic is sequences, and we're going to go into the first topic here. Okay, so how to build a sequence. The first step that we're going to go into is what is a sequence trigger. So I know it's 2026. Everyone is building sequences today, and what I mean by a sequence is basically a certain amount of actions that you're going to take, and you're going to put your prospect into as a prospecting journey. So a sequence trigger, and what it is a reason, quote unquote, for the sequence. So the default is going to be cold outbound. Like the sequence trigger hypothetically is what action happened to them, or what action did you do upon them or the market do upon them that basically is the basis for your outreach. So if there is no reason at all, then the action that happens essentially is you are just loading a prospect in the sequence. But there are a lot of different triggers that could trigger an action. So there's a lot of different reasons of why you could reach out to someone, and some of them could be motion-based, meaning they have a problem, or, let's say they downloaded some content, or let's say there was a market change, or even a seasonal change of, you sell something that's seasonal and now it's, you sell coats and now all of a sudden it's Q4. And so that's kind of the trigger. But essentially what a trigger or a reason or a basis for a sequence is what is the action that happened to the person, or what is the action that they took upon themselves that means that you should be doing some type of outreach to them. Now we're going to go into, in one of the later laps, how you can combine that with personalization. But essentially a trigger is what is the action that happened to them. So you can cohort. I go into this in the personalization at scale session, but you can cohort people with a one-to-many action, and you can put them all in a sequence. So the difference between personalization and relevance is personalization is one-to-one, and relevance is one-to-many. So in this case scenario, the one-to-many reason that we're building is the trigger. So I'll give you an example. People that downloaded content, people that attended a webinar, people that attended a live stream like today. So hypothetically, you could put everyone into that live stream. Now we're going to go into, in the next pizza pie slice or the next lap, how to combine personalization with the relevance trigger. But essentially it's an action. So, you have postbound action. Sorry, now you know it's Italy. Come on, Italy, come on. Well, I'm practicing my this. I'm not doing it like a native yet, but essentially that's a motorcycle. Maybe it's Lizzie McGuire out there on her motorcycle with her dream boat. I don't even remember his name. But essentially what the action can be is in 4 different categories of, like, they became a hand raiser, so they're requesting to talk to you. The second category is they took an action, a marketing action, but it was non-hand raising. So content downloads, webinar registrants, people attended a live stream, people attended an event, people registered for an event but didn't attend it. The third category is they took an action upon the market, or the market took an action upon them. So let's say they have some history with you of, they downloaded a demo, but they didn't actually schedule one. Or, companies that IPO'd, for instance. And then the fourth one is the outbound, where the trigger is, so to speak, is you're loading them into the sequence, and it's the play itself. But essentially that's the basis for a sequence. Now, I would always recommend that you have a header sequence for the actual action, and not for each subset of that category within that action. So I'll give you an instance. I know it sounds confusing, but I'll give you an instance. If one of the plays is people who attended a webinar, The mistake I see a lot of people making is they create a sequence for each webinar that they do, or people who downloaded content, and they'll create a sequence for each piece of content that people could download. One of the things that you're trying to mitigate with reps is complexity, right? So everyone wants to take advantage of all these triggers. Everyone wants to reach out with relevance. Everyone wants to reach out in a very timely manner. A lot of these triggers are only relevant for a certain amount of time. If, like, let's say people who change jobs, for instance, but they have no way to systematize it to where they can sequence to and surface to the top for the reps the people that are actually relevant in that moment. So we want to aim for, we can get the most relevant reasons in front of the reps, but also simplify as much as possible. So a mistake that I see people making, especially specifically for marketing teams, is they create a webinar, a sequence for each different webinar, and a piece of or for content downloads, they create a sequence for each piece of content. And you might say, well, yeah, then it's hyper specific, which I'll get into how you can accomplish that without having to create a new one for each action in one of the other pizza pie slices. But essentially what happens if you do that is then you have 100 different content downloads sequences, and then you have 50 different webinars, or let's say you attend 20 events, you have 20 events. And so reps can't handle all of that. And so they essentially stop calling on them and they don't use the sequence at all just because there's flat out too many. So I do one header sequence for the action and then use the dynamic tag and create that of, like, let's say the piece of content that was downloaded, and use that as a dynamic tag within Outreach to where it surfaces in there for the rep, essentially what piece of content was downloaded. So a tip that I have here, or what webinar was attended. So it's like, I noticed that you attended, and it's like webinar, the link, and it surfaces in there for the rep. But in my case, for instance, which we're going to go into the next section, how to combine that with personalization. In my case, you have to customize anyway on that first sentence. So two tips that I would definitely have if you're going to do this is, number one, that the rep is always checking. The amount of formatting errors, up to 92% of cold emails that are sent have some kind of formatting error, right? And that's your biggest, sign to your prospect that essentially it's not to them, which can turn off their desire to respond. So we want them to feel valued and like we are contextualizing things, but not like we're trying to get away with something of personalizing without actually putting in the time. So two things that I would recommend. Number one is that if you're going to do that, it's a manual step where at minimum the rep has to look at that tag of, like, the webinar that was watched, for instance, just to check it. So there's a lot of things that can be outliers in sequences. So for instance, if you were to have a title, you were to have the dynamic tag of a title, for instance, and it said Senior Vice President of Business Development for Latin America and APAC and EMEA region, you wouldn't actually use that title in full. If you were just a human, you would say SVPs, right? You would shorten it. There's no way that you would put in that entire thing. Or if it was like William Tiffany III, you'd shorten that to Will or Bill. Or if it was like America's Broadcasting Company, Inc., you would say ABC. And so the first thing that I would recommend, that always, regardless of what the step is, that it is some type of manual step where the rep goes and double checks that everything looks good, regardless of the email. Don't send an email, in my opinion, without having some kind of manual check first. But the second thing that I would recommend is for the webinar tag itself, you'll probably have an internal nomenclature in terms of, like, what the webinar is called internally, of, like, maybe it's like the date of, like, FTS Olympics, February 8th, February 9th, to have an internal customer facing webinar title so your marketing team puts in there, let's say, of like Olympics Day 3, Cold Olympics Day 3, so that when it surfaces in that reason for that sequence trigger for the rep, that it essentially gives it a customer facing stamp. So kind of in summary, a sequence trigger or a trigger is an action that happened either to the prospect or an action that the prospect took that is the basis for the sequence itself. And if it's a cold outbound, meaning there is no trigger, we're going to go into a bunch of different triggers, but if there's no trigger, then the trigger or the action or basis of the sequence essentially is that you put the person into the sequence. That was the action that was taken with them. But essentially, from a high level, I'm viewing this as a system of how do I reorganize these and surface to the top for my reps. What are the most valuable and trigger ready leads based on all the triggers in the market in a quick, systematizable way? So we get them to the porch with the right flowers and wine and food to the right doorstep. And then it's their job to walk in and add the personalization and say the right thing to get the person on the hook to want an actual meeting. So that is section one, pizza slice one. I'm three seconds ahead. Look at that. Slice one, done. Slice one is done. I like how you can hear in the background all of the different motorcycles. I was talking to Min, our marketer, earlier, and he said, he was like, what happens if a scooter goes by? And I'm like, well, it's Italy. When in Rome, when in Milan, you just lean in. So I think it kind of adds the effect. So sorry if there's a little bit of noise in the background. Okay, so that is step one of how to build a sequence. Is what is a trigger? It's an action the person took or the market took on them or they took from a marketing perspective. That's the basis of the sequence, for the outreach. And if they don't have any reason, then it's basically the cold outbound reason is we're just sequencing them in there. So step two, or subtopic number two, is once I have them in there, how do I combine this trigger with personalization? Hear me out. There is a lot of noise in the market. I don't know how else to be nice and say it. Noise in the market about what personalization is and what personalization isn't, and a lot of different takes, but I'm just going to go from a definition perspective. The words hyper personalization do not exist. It is personalization or it's relevance. Personalization means one-to-one. Relevance means one-to-many, regardless of how big that cohort is. So people who downloaded content, people who live in Italy, people who are in Italy for the Olympics. So people who attend an event, people who companies that IPO'd, for instance. So it's a group of people, but that is relevance. It's one to many, and personalization is one to one. And people say in the market all the time, and it makes me just like silently raged. Silently, as I'm telling you now, I'm silently raged that they'll say, well, if I could pick personalization or relevance, I'd pick relevance all day of the week. And I'm like, yeah, me too. But you don't have to pick, number one. And number two, it's better if you don't. It's better if you incorporate both relevance and personalization. So what I wanted to go into is how do you combine this relevance and how do you hook to the buyer persona relevance? So you have two pieces of relevance going on in this email here, in this sequence, and you have one piece of personalization. I would always recommend personalization, not always. I go into a couple of ad hoc cases where I wouldn't, but personalization is going to be the thing that pattern interrupts and gets people to respond to you, period. Most people are not personalizing. Very few are. We're going to go into how to put that into a system, essentially. But most people aren't personalizing. So the thing that's going to interrupt the pattern, which is very, very good for them, is they have a little system at the bottom of their brainstem called the RAC, Reticular Activation System. And essentially what this thing does is it filters to your brain, what stimulus should you pay attention to? And the main thing that it's looking at, like for instance, you hear that noise in the background. So that was abnormal. I hadn't heard it before. But all the street noise before that, I was, it had subsumed in the background in my head because it was normal. I had been used to hearing it in the background of cars passing by, but that twinkling bell was stand out. So it's teaching your brain what are the things that are abnormal that you haven't seen before. so you can evaluate whether I need to fight or flight, or this thing is okay. Do I need to run away from this thing? Do I need to fight this thing, or is this thing completely okay? And so that RAS system, essentially, if you hit any of the normal things of a cold email, which most people do, whether that be in language, whether that be in time of day, people are logging in, and the statistics are pretty clear. They're reading emails for anywhere from 7 to 9 seconds. So those 7 to 9 seconds is not because they're actually reading the email. It's because they're logging into the email and they're saying, does this hit the system of a salesperson? Does this look like the pattern? Listen to that pattern of a salesperson, or is this something that I need to read? So when they log in and you hit a certain amount of words, just following up, happy Monday, hope you and your kids are safe during these uncertain times, hope you're well, just following up, just circling back, just bubbling to the top of your inbox, my name's blank, I'm with blank, we help blank do blank. You hit any of that language, and especially in that first line, their system goes, this is a sales email, and you can log out. The thing that interrupts that pattern, which is incredibly valuable, is something that does not hit that language, which a lot of people would say, why don't you do something like some kind of joke or gimmick? I am not very jokey in my emails, number one. And number two, you put them in the wrong mindset from an ego state perspective. You might get them to laugh, but that doesn't mean that they are in the right spot then to listen to from a business perspective. I would argue that they're in mutually exclusive positions, meaning once they're laughing, like, you're not a joker, you're not a jester, you're not there to make them laugh. You're there to say something relevant, to ask a question, diagnose an unknown, and book a meeting based on it. That is our job. And there is a very, very big difference between being different and being silly, right? So in that first line, personalizing one fact about them, it erupts a pattern. Like, the stats are very, very clear, meaning the sequences that I've written for teams, the main element in that first line, sadly enough, the thing that, industry average for open rates are 15 to 25%, industry average reply rates are 0.5 to 0.7%, not 50%, half a percent, because most people are hitting pattern language. The sequences that I write, I'm just saying this so that you know, 65 to 85% open rate, and at a minimum, a 17% reply rate, right? 17 to 25, that's just if people aren't deleting most of it. If they're actually sending the emails, 45%. If they are actually like using it well and putting some thought into it, I've seen as high as 87% reply rates. Why? And I would like to say that's because of all relevance and it all says the right things. But the honest to God truth is these have been deployed by a lot of reps at once, that I obviously can't be there to look at every single email that's going out. But the thing that they are sending out that they're like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden this is working, is there's a piece of personalization. That is getting people to read it. If people open your email and they think it's a sales email, they will log out. So in that first line, I'm combining the trigger plus the personalization. So I think of the movie, if y'all have ever seen that, I'm going to date myself, but He's Just Not That Into You. There's basically, girl goes on a date with a guy, and Connor is his name, and it goes pretty well. And he's like, I'll call you. And then he doesn't, unfortunately. And the girl really wants to see him again. And so she knows that he goes to this bar. So she shows it. She's like, well, I need a reason for my, to go see him. So he left a pen, kind of like a throwaway dentist pen there, like at the date. So her reason was she wanted to return the pen. And his brother is at the bar, who's the bartender, who she later falls in love with, and they end up together. Full disclosure, I just blew the movie. And he's like, you want to return Connor's pen? And she's like, hey, some people need their pen. That's how I view the trigger. Just that people downloaded content, just because people attended a webinar, just because people attended an event, just because people requested a demo and, event didn't schedule one, whatever the trigger is, you have to keep in mind, if they wanted a demo, if they wanted a discovery call, they would have asked for it. They would have come inbound, right? So, but it's not completely throwaway. What I hear from reps is they're like, these leads aren't great. And I'm like, well, it's not that the quality of them or the ICP is low. It's that they're not immediately responding with, I want to have a conversation like typical inbound. It has nothing to do with the ICP title or level. It's their intent, so to speak, of like in inbound, they're ready to evaluate. So I want to use the reason, but it is not good enough, right? Otherwise they would have come inbound. So I take that trigger and I bake that into the sequence. And I'm like, but more importantly, and then I have an outreach within the field of a custom tag that has, if you do 2 brackets, an exclamation point, and any text in between, and then 2 brackets on the back end, one of the wonderful things about outreach is it blocks you from sending it unless you erase it and fill it in. So it's like, in the sequence of you're writing 80% of it for your reps, but then they have to fill in that 10% of personalization. So it's like, I noticed you attended this webinar, but more importantly, I saw that you wrote this article. I noticed you attended this event, but more importantly, I saw that you made this comment. I noticed that you requested a demo, but we didn't get the chance to meet with you. But more importantly, I saw your bio line when you said X, Y, and Z. So at the beginning, the front line, how you combine the two is you bake in the reason for the sequence and you hyper tag with a dynamic tag, whatever, like to customize whatever that webinar is, for instance, or I saw you requested a demo 5 days ago, for instance, and it's comma, but more importantly, and then it's the piece of personalization. So the most important thing here, above pattern interrupting, which is what makes it effective, is that you're focusing on them. So you're like, here's the trigger. I noticed that you IPO'd, but more importantly, I saw that you said this. I saw that you did this. I noticed that you were acquired, but equally as importantly, I saw that you made this comment the other day. So it's shifting the focus. Yes, this trigger is nice. This pen is nice, but it's not enough. If you wanted to go on the second date, he would have called, right? Or he would show up. So it's about focusing on them, taking that conversation and saying, this is all awesome, but more importantly, you. So where the last point of the conversation is about the prospect in a personalized manner, and you're putting that intent there where it actually belongs. Yeah. I think that pizza pie, honestly, I was about to say is my favorite part. It is, but that intro video, which I did not do, keep in mind, that's why I'm ranting and raving about it. But I do like the pizza pie counter of like, how more cliche can you get? You have to keep in mind, I was raised in the, I'm about to turn 40, sadly and tragically enough. So kind of this Olympics is buzzer beater. I'm turning 40 on March 1st. And part of my era growing up is we had the Lizzie McGuire movie of like, she goes to Rome and she's on the back of the scooter and da-da-da. This pizza pie kind of, I'm sorry to any of Italians out there, is what I'm trying to say. I realize that your culture is about more than just pizza pie, right? It's also about scooters too. I'm just kidding. Okay, so that is the first 2 steps. What is the sequence trigger and how do I combine that with the personalization? So sequence trigger is the action, and and sorry, I was looking at this guy. That's a pattern interrupt. I was like, what is he talking about? And the how you combine it with the personalization is you can bake in and write in for the sequence as the header, that front line, and arguably 80% of the email of like, I noticed that you downloaded the content or attended the webinar or blah, blah, but more importantly, and then it's up to the rep to put in the personalization, which we go into in the personalization at scale session, which is a completely different session. So those are the first 2 pieces. Lap 3, pizza pie, slice 3, is I want to go into, now that we have the reason for the trigger and we have the how to combine that with personalization, the steps, timing, and channels of the perfect sequence. So we're going to get into some more logistics here. So what a sequence is essentially, it's a sequence of different actions and being really thoughtful and intentional about what the buyer journey is from front to end for someone that you are prospecting, right? So you have, of like, for people who downloaded content that we're going to call on, instead of just randomly emailing them and being thoughtless about it, not only from the measurement perspective, the data perspective, it's but from the like buyer journey, that having an intentionality about how you're going to reach out to someone and when you want them to go through what actions. But something I want to stress to people is people are actually receiving this outreach, right? So we kind of get into the mode, or I've often seen and I've often fallen victim to, is we're putting together the sequence and we're kind of thinking of it in the abstract, but you have to keep in mind that someone's actually going through this actual buyer journey that you mapped out. So it's important to keep that in mind. But as far as the timing and the logistics and essentially the channels and the steps. So why don't we start with, I'm going to start with steps. As far as steps, when it comes to specifically, and I'm going to put on deck the use case of a postbound lead, someone who's done a non-hand-raising marketing action, or outbound or bridgebound of like something's, happened to them, or something's happened in the market of like it's a certain time of season, or they people who you've talked to in the past and have ghosted you, or companies that IPO'd, for instance, or people who downloaded content. We're going to use that as the use case. As far as steps, what I typically recommend is 21 steps over, 16 steps over 21 business days, right? So you have to keep in mind those are business days, which means all in all, it's really over about a month if you stay on time. Most reps don't, but if you stay on time, it's really a month of outreach. But the steps themselves, the first step is just a LinkedIn research step. So that first step is really important for a number of different reasons. No matter what, I would recommend at the beginning of a sequence that you have a catch-all step. And what that step is you're going to load people into these sequences, but I always recommend the reason we have reps is so that they can catch and think and do and apply the touch of a human that AI just can't. That's the point of a human. So people say, can you do this without a human? I'm like, well, listen to yourself talk. AI is supposed to enhance what you're doing, but it's certainly not supposed to replace what you're doing. And I'd argue if it can replace what you're doing, you weren't doing something very meaningful for your prospect. So that first step is when you load prospects in there, it should be as a catch-all. So the rep goes that step and does a number of things. Number one, you want to make sure that they go to LinkedIn profile if you're in an industry that is catered to LinkedIn. Meaning that they're on LinkedIn, CFOs included, CIOs included. And they're looking, is this the right person? Is this the right company? Are they still at the company? Data decay is ever, ever, ever prominent. So you have to keep in mind with data decay, meaning your elite, like people change companies, or they switch titles, or they switch jobs, or the email's not correct. 3.6% per month is how much your data is decaying, meaning people switch jobs all the time. 75% of people during COVID thought about or did leave their job. 25% actually did, right? Of like they changed companies. So that first step, you want to look at, there is no one's database. I can say this beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is a fact. There is no one's database that is completely clean. There's deduplicates. It doesn't exist. It does not exist for anyone. So there's duplicates, all kinds of different things that can be going on. Sorry, I'm just realizing that, are y'all a little smudgy? That's clear. Hey, that's clear. I was like, hey, is there some smudge on my camera? Sorry for that. So the database, you're like, and then a minute, whatever it was, then she cleaned off her camera. The database is not clean. So at that step, they want to make sure, is it still at the right person, right title, right company? Your reps will tell you that not all the data is clean. Is this actually within my territory? Is this already a current customer? Is this someone we're already engaged with? So they have that in terms of the step. But the second piece is that they're looking to source personalized reasons for outreach. I recommend no more than 5 minutes, and that they research 3 premises and they hit save within the notes. There's a very systematizable, easy way to do that within outreach. I'm going to do it within the personalization at scale session, but 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes to research 3 different premises. That will be the only time that you research the entirety of the sequence. I wouldn't fall victim to, or let your reps fall victim to, taking too much time to, and endless time to go down that rabbit hole of like, where do their kids go to school kind of thing, not that it's relevant anyway. So that first step is a LinkedIn research step. I recommend 10 calls and 5 emails, but hear me out. Everyone's going to be like, no one wants that. And I'm like, well, it depends. Based on the outreach you normally get, I agree with you, but I'd argue that no one wants 1 email. right? If they're personalized and you're finding something they didn't know, people want 100 of them. The problem is that we're not doing that. So within each email needs to be completely different, and each email needs to be complete. So the complexity of writing a sequence is, it's kind of like writing a crossword. The first word is easy. I just need a 5-letter word. But as you add in words, they have to all line up. So you need to build a sequence in a way that if someone just reads this email, that they have a complete understanding they have a complete understanding, and they find out something that they didn't know from you, and it's good enough that they're reading that email. And also, if you have someone who's reading all of the emails together, each email is different, each email is unique, and each email adds a piece of value. If that email does not add a piece of value, something that they didn't know, a piece of content they haven't seen, something around a problem that they're trying to solve, no, completely free, no lift to them. If it doesn't include something like that, I would argue that you shouldn't send the email to begin with. So for the 5 emails, I use 3 different personalized premise. 2 of them are bumps, but in both of those bumps, they're intentional, meaning I include a piece of content. So the main mistake that I see people see in terms of timing is, I think of it in terms of 5 different pods, an email with two cold calls. The 2 most common patterns for people in terms of outreach that are bad are either equidistant, day 5, day 10, day 15, day 20, day 25, so on and so forth. So you teach the prospect that they're on a calendar and they realize it, or they're really aggressive in the front. Email on day 1, email on day 2, email on day 4, 5, and 6 and 7, but then they patter out near the end. So you're overwhelming at first, and then you're teaching your prospect that if they just wait long enough, you'll do the one thing that they want, which is go away. So you want to flip that action. So I'd be lighter in the beginning, always personalize, always adding value, so they get to know you over time. But then in the end, you heat up the steps. So I do my first pod starting day 1, day 112, which is email, call, only 2 voicemails, one at the beginning and one at the end. Pod 2 starts on business day 8, email, call, 889. And then third pod starts on day business day 13. So we're speeding up a little bit. 13, 13, 14, email, call. And then the fourth pod starts day 18, and it goes immediately into the back pod. So email, call, email. You have to keep in mind, people freak out about how much they're reaching out to people. I've already had probably, 9 or 10 numbers call me that I don't know. Who is it? I have no idea. Why? I didn't check, I didn't check into it, and I didn't pick up the call. So you have 2 voicemails, and where you're going to see most of your results are going to be on the back end. So regardless of who writes a sequence, email 1 and 2 and the last one, if you write it effectively, are going to be the most effective emails. The middle trough emails are always the lowest in terms of conversion, regardless of who, even if the Pope himself writes, okay, sorry, the Italy, that's the last reference. Even if the Pope himself writes the sequence, those middle emails are going to be the trough in conversion. So I would do a spread like that. And where you're going to see the most conversion is going to be email 1, 2, but especially email 5 if you write it effectively, which we go into breakup emails later. And you're adding value to each step. But even the more decision maker and higher seniority and more people are going to respond and take a meeting on the 5th day in terms of the sequence. So that is the sequence and timing. So kind of in a summary, the sequence trigger, the first pizza pie slice, the sequence trigger is the reason that you're putting them into a sequence, whether that be an inbound reason, a postbound reason, they took a hand-raising marketing action that's not hand-raising, or a bridge-bound reason, or an outbound. Second thing we went into was personalization. How do I combine that with a relevance trigger, which is in the first line, you put the reason with a dynamic tag. I noticed that you attended events, so it'd be like, day whatever of the cold outreach Olympics. But more importantly, and then the field for personalization with the two brackets, exclamation point, and then personalize here, and then 2 brackets on the back end, so it blocks your reps from sending it. That is a godsend for my reps, my opinion. I cannot tell you how many people I've seen. It's like personalized line here, but outreach It is a godsend to have that feature that blocks you from, I truly mean this. I have seen other sales engagement providers, even the sales engagement provider themselves, send out a mass email that said, "Hi, Beck, personalized line here." I was like, oh my gosh. So point being, the second piece of pie slice that we went into was how you combine that trigger with the personalization is, you bake the reason in with the dynamic tag that the rep checks, I checks, and then the personalized reason on the back end, which we're going to go into in personalization at scale. And then in terms of the timing and the steps, the timing and the channels, I would do, if it were me, and this is for a SaaS buyer, AC, like SaaS buyer of, and I would say anywhere from CFO, CIO, CISO, any kind of technical engineering, network security architect, anyone in HR, anyone in marketing, anyone but there are some ad hoc cases where I would not recommend this. Let's say like if you're calling on plumbers, for instance, or you're calling on, HVAC technicians, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. But what I would recommend is 16 steps over 21 business days, 5 emails, 10 calls, only 2 voicemails, and a LinkedIn research step at the beginning. So you're sanity checking and making sure that it's someone you want to talk to, and also vetting those first 3, those 3 personalized reasons, and saving them with an outreach or within your notes if you don't have an engagement provider, so you can fuel the rest of the sequence. And we're going to see the most results are email 1, email 2, and email 5. Right? If you write it correctly, which we go into in the cold email session of how to write a break, it can be like, you didn't pick up, you must not value your team, or blah, blah, blah. But where you're going to see the most results are going to be 1, 2, and 5. The middle emails always are going to be the trough, but you can't get to the goodness of the back end. Most people drop off at that point. You can't get to the goodness of the back end unless you actually go through those middle emails. And the emails should always have something unique to offer and say something unique and add a unique piece of value for each one of the emails. So if they tune into one or they tune into all 5, which in some cases they're going to, you never know what they're going to do, that they always get unique value. It can't be just following up, just following up, just following up, just following up kind of thing. So those are the first 3 pizza slices. Okay, now let's go into, we're heating up now. Let's go into logistics, the setup, and the execution. So in terms of setting up a sequence and in terms of executing it, something that's really, really important, and this is a sequence strategy overall, there are so many reasons, hypothetically, if you said, screw Beck, I don't want to listen to her, and I do want to write a unique webinar campaign or, sequence, for instance, for every webinar we do. One of the main things that I see for companies, and this is by and large, especially for enterprise companies, a lot of companies I work with, good, bad, or ugly is meaning, a lot of the companies that I work with, most I would say are enterprise. And I would say at the minimum, if they're doing well, they have 1,000 sequences in their system. And they're like, what is all of this? And so they turned on in the beginning the ability for reps to write sequences. And all of a sudden you quickly have 1,000. And then you have 2,000. And nobody knows what's what or what's where, and no one can use anything. No one's learning from anything. No one's measuring anything, and so it just becomes absolute mayhem internally. And so usually orgs have to go through a process of how many sequences do I delete to actually, just to get this under control of, like, they go through the splurge and then, they go through the delete process. And I hear the feedback a lot from reps of like, well, I want to be able to write my own sequences because if marketing sends over these sequences, I don't think our buyer talks like this, or I don't think that we should be doing this. And I hear the justification, but all of a sudden you have 15 billion sequences. The strength of a sequence strategy, I have used a team of 10 in the past to truly outrun a team in volume of bookings of 75 of my direct competitor. Like, I knew their internal numbers because of strategy and system. There's always a system. Even the word cosmos in Greek, another word in Greece, means system. That's what the world means, is a system. So when I'm thinking about my sequence strategy, again, you have to keep in mind, all of these triggers are great. All of these reasons for outreach are great. But if there is not an automated way to get people into that sequence without the rep knowing and to their front desk without them having to do anything, mark my words, they will not call on them. They can't. They can't. It's physically impossible to know all the companies that IPO'd and all the companies that requested a demo and schedule one, people who went with a competitor and they're up on renewal at month 11, people who job change, and then people are making decisions within the first 30 to 90 days maximum. So there is a small window. People who commented on a competitor's page, like, how do I get that into, because they might be in cycle, people who just dropped a recent tech integration, people who just grabbed a tech integration, let's say, that's very relevant to you because they're adjacent. Like they just bought socks and they just bought skis and next they're probably going to need a coat, right? Those reasons, and we're going to go into a lot of them, 139 of them. There's a lot of them. And each one of those, you have subsets of 10, 15, 20 of like webinars, let's say, that go on. So it is impossible if you are having your reps list clean and do anything automated. Not only is it sucking up their time, like everyone, and reps don't want to do it. And so they don't want to call in those leads. Simply put, by the time that they got all of those people into the sequence, if they were doing some kind of data clean step, the trigger is passed. It just has. There's no way to do it. So what I lean into is the strength of tech. So I would build a sequence reason for each one of these, of like people who download a webinar, or people who watched a webinar, people who attended an event, people who registered an event but didn't attend it. 80% of the messaging is written, dynamic tag is there with personalization there. And then as much as you can, the thing that I did that helped me outrun a team of 75 with 10 people. I got accused of by the outreach CEO. He said, you're just printing money. Is my back end in terms of logistics setup is anyone who hits that reason should go automatically into the sequence for the person who owns the account. So someone attends a webinar and they are part of an owned account for, Luigi, sorry, it goes straight into his account, and if it's for Mario, it goes straight into Mario's account. And people who attend an event, if they attend an event and Mario owns it, it goes straight into their account. Luigi owns it, it goes straight into their account. Brian Bottano, it goes straight into his account. Meaning the sequence for them. So when they log into outreach or sales engagement, it's not a mayhem of what do I do and when do I do it? It's, okay, I'm just going to go to, and I told my reps, I'm like, don't even fall in love with the sequence headers or names. Don't even worry about that. Just fall in love with counting. So my reps would log in, and then their view was, it would say number 1, and then the sequence name, number 2, then the sequence name, number 3, and then the sequence name. And they're like, do I have any tasks due? 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 And every single day they would just go through and do the task of like the email or the call for the person in that order. Once you start people, that's not the end. They have a whole bunch of steps that they're going to have to go through after that. So it's, if you're trying to do the math of, well, I need to follow up on these people. I need to follow up on these people. I need to follow up on these people. And, oh, this person just did your reps would just be overwhelmed. That would happen in their brain. That collision would happen in their brain. So essentially, it just needs to be number 1, and they see if there's any tasks due. Number 2, see if there's any tasks due. Number 3, see if there's any tasks due. And what you can do as a leader is at the end of the month, you're going to have some hunch at the beginning. I think webinar attendees will convert the best, then content downloads, then, people who requested demo and schedule one. And then at the end of every month, I would analyze which one of these sequence reasons did do the best. Where did I have the highest open rates, conversion rates, booked meeting, and closed one? And then instead of like walking my reps through what I wanted them to do then, I just went in and I renumbered the sequences. So like instead of events being number 4, now it just says number 1, right? And people requested a demo, that's number two. And the one that I didn't think it was going to work was, let's say people who made job changes that worked really well. So that's number three. So how, as a manager, you can kind of control that without confusing them the hell out of them. Is just you're numbering the sequences in terms of when they should call on them, and then they're just bringing up a view of like sequence one. The view is my dashboard of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They don't even have to worry about the reason. They're like, do I have any tasks due? Do I have any tasks due? Meaning emails or calls that are outstanding. And they're just going down and down and down the row. So it essentially is reorging for them in real time. What is the best person for them to be calling and emailing in that actual moment for that actual day? And each day they're just going through, okay, no tasks, 5 tasks, I got to do those. And they're just going through it throughout their day. So essentially the logistical setup that you have to do, why I would recommend writing a sequence with the trigger is, yes, so you can write it for me. You can speed all of that process up and not just have a blank shell sequence, so to speak, but also you focus on the automation of it. People who downloaded the content need to go in there, and the hyper tag of the web, the content they downloaded goes in there. So they just have to come in and look and system check that it's correct and add the personalization, and they keep going. So the people, and you can do anything you want. Really, that's how I was outrunning those 75 reps. Is anyone who IPO'd, if someone IPO'd and it was owned by someone, that all the people in our CRM from that company that IPO'd went straight into that sequence for the person. Like if you have any manual setup of it's like, this person's looking at your company in Florida. So like buyer intent vendors, they're like, someone from Dell is looking at your company. The rep's never going to do anything with that. So it'd be like that trigger happens in your CRM. It's anyone from that company is sequenced into the sequence for the person that owns it for the buyer intent sequence. So automation, you can automate much more than you think. So I'd say any sequence reason that you don't have automated in terms of the fill, then I would imagine in my head, I would count on the reps are not calling on it. So you just want to label the sequences. Sorry, I'm going to hit the timer. On this one. So kind of in summary here, you want to have all the different sequence reasons with I'm going to hit the pizza timer. I'm going to keep going for about a minute. So in kind of summary here, you're going to have each one of these sequence reasons, only one for each header trigger of like webinar downloads, content downloads, people requested demo and schedule on, even people like you can write out a sequence for anything. The point of a sequence is to speed things up and get the right people in front of your reps at the right time, even if it's just you. So you want to write out the sequence, have the automated trigger that it goes into that header sequence. And when they log in, they're like, okay, so I have the person here in front of me of who's the right person, what the trigger is. Okay, they download this piece of content. And then their job is to double check, do the research, the 5 minutes of research, like go into personalization at scale, and then fill in the personalization reason, and then ship, and voila. Sorry, I'm not allowed to use French, and voila. So I would think about from a system perspective, and then as from a rep perspective or from a leadership perspective, I would put my best guess in the beginning of out of these 10 campaigns, I think number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in terms of I think content is going to be first, event attendee is going to be next, IPO is going to be next, people who, blog subscribers are going to be next, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then be monomaniacal at the end of the month of analyzing which piece of data, which sequence did you the most favors, and then you just reorg. You don't have to teach anyone through anything. You're just numbering, just reassigning the numbers of like, okay, now number 1 is IPO and number 2 is buyer intent, like G2, let's say, or 6 cents, and then number 3 is people who abandon the chat, for instance. The last thing that I'll say from a system perspective, and the reason I'm saying this is because of how effective it was. Getting heated up. I need a break. Is how effective it was. Is I would do it for owned, of like it goes to the account owner for someone who's owned. But there's a huge category specifically for inbound and postbound triggers of people who aren't owned but are still qualified. there's also a big group in there that aren't qualified. So essentially what I had was and people thought I was nuts at the time. I said, who wants to volunteer for a idea that I have? My reps were all like nervous, and a couple of them were like, okay, I volunteer. And I said, okay, you're going to be on the postbound unowned teams. And what that means is you're going to have content downloads, webinar registration, blah, blah, blah. But who's going to be sequenced in there? You don't have own accounts. Who's going to be sequenced in there is people who are unowned, but who still hit this criteria. And you can put whatever criteria you want in there of like, let's say companies that are 50 people plus, and it's a certain level of title. It has to be director level of, whatever, sales and above, or, manager level and IT and above. And out of all of those people who downloaded content, if it was owned, it went to the person who was owned, the rep who was owned. If it was unowned, I would still use automation, always use automation for that sequencing. It cleaned out all of the people who didn't hit ICP, in terms of either company or in terms of their, what I'd say ICP, or ICC, ideal customer company, and ICT, ideal customer title. They're two different categories. Some people are at the right company, but they don't have the right role. Some people have the right role, but they're not at the right company. And if it hits those criteria of whatever you want them to be, even if it's like an integration or et cetera, but they were unowned, they were sequenced to this team of reps, and they smoked quota. They were booking upwards of like outbound. Keep in mind, outbound meetings per month, sadly enough, for teams is around 3 at a max, right? They were booking upwards of 50 meetings. And these are not inbound, right? They were killing because there were so many people that were in there that hit the, ICC and ICT, but weren't owned. So all of the other reps on the other person on the team were like, hey, you're unfair. I was like, look, I asked who wants to be involved in this project, and I didn't hear anything back. So those reps were like, they were absolutely loaded. So I think it's worth mentioning, I would create a team of postbound unowned people who are hitting those triggers. But you also think about, are they qualified from a title perspective, from a company perspective, whatever you want that criteria to be. And then it sequences into them by automation. I cannot stress this enough. By automation. If they had to list clean for all of that, there's no way. They just can't. Even if they did, like they can only eat so many burgers, right? And even if they could, like, the burger wouldn't have been hot anymore. Or sorry, the pizza wouldn't have been hot anymore. So I would lean on automation to put those into the sequence, and at the end of the month, look at what's performing and what's not, and then re-rank for the reps so that they're always calling. You're, as a leader, getting to them the right person at the right time with the right reason. You're like, here's the flowers, here's the house, here's the outfit that you're going to wear, and you spray some cologne on them. And you're like, okay, now you're at the front doorstep. And then it's up to them to walk in the door and, be nice, be kind, and be interesting on the date. So that is truly using, it's not about AI replacing people. I'm like, if they are, then I would argue they should have already been replaced. They're not doing something that's actually, valuable. But it's about how much of this manual crap can I get out of their way, so that then they should, instead of worrying about what should I wear and spending all their brain calories there, you're doing that for them. Or what house should I go to? Or, what person should I talk to? Who should I go on a date with? Or, I want to find people to X, Y, and Z. You're taking care of all of that, but it's up to them to then ask a question that's relevant and include the personalization reason within the text. So the 10% of personalization, I go into in personalization at scale, but that is the strength of the system, and that's the strength of, as a leader. The last thing I'll say is the build up front for people. Sometimes, usually the people who do it, they're dweeby like me, right? So they're like, you couldn't stop them anyway. But the build up front is you have to put some time in, especially as a leader. Once you do, I'm telling you, once you build this thing, it's evergreen. It's evergreen. It's just like, literally, you are going to the printing press and printing money long-term for each single sequence that you set up. Okay, so that is lap 4. Now we're going to go into lap 5, or pie slice 5, which is who should write them and what to measure. Okay. I think we got history of the Olympics going on in the background. Sometimes they do this in some interims. Okay, who should write them? Let's start there. There's a lot of people who will write them. Marketing does, sometimes reps do. Reps always say that they want to, but then they don't often do it. There's a lot of different back and forth. Yeah, I'm just going to be candid. It's the fifth slice of the day. So I'm going to be candid. There are problems no matter who writes it. Period. Marketing will write it, and poor marketing or sales enablement will write it. And from me to you, to the writer, no matter who writes it or how good it is or how much time they invest in it, if you send a set of sequences over to sales or SDRs, the feedback every time is going to be, this is not how I talk. This is not our buyer. Our buyer doesn't care about this. I don't think marketing, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, cool, Brendan. Well, then why don't you write it? And they're like, oh, well, I just don't have the time and blah, blah. And it's just excuses to not prospects, right? Who I suggest writes it. Here's the thing. There's two different pieces of writing a good email that I would, well, there's a lot, I essentially say there's three different pieces. And it's just about knowing who my general recommendation is about knowing who is the best at these three pieces. The first one is knowing your buyer. So, I mean, that sounds like a no duh, and what I mean by knowing the buyer of, you're like, if you were to close their eyes, and a lot of, for instance, AEs are going to be like, oh, well, I know the buyer. I'm like, cool. So I want you to don't touch your screen. What is your CIO metric on? What's the industry average of that? You call into IT director. What is the average server uptime, for instance? What's the average network latency? At what point does network latency cause a increase in server downtime? What's the average number of backup tests that are run? What's the average backup success rate? At what point does the backup success rate cause a problem with server downtime? If they don't know that, you don't know your buyer, period. I don't care what anyone says. You can talk to, just because and I essentially think of it like this. I've been in France for 3 years now. There's a certain amount of language that you learn just from being there. But there's also a certain amount of language you learn from studying. There's no amount of time that you can spend in France that would outrun the amount of studying. So just because time and chair and someone's been selling to someone a lot or been talking to this person a lot doesn't mean that they know anything. Truly, for me, I'm just being candid here. Of who knows the buyer the best, what they're metriced on, what the industry averages over their metrics, what are the top 20 metrics for them. If they can't even name the lagging indicator, they do not know the buyer. So that's the first thing. The second thing is who knows the mechanical setup of sequences the best. What I mean by that is, does the person know email deliverability? Only 59% of emails actually wind up in the inbox for the primary inbox. So even if people want to talk about quality all the time, it's like, whoa, you're shaving off 41%. So do you have DKIM set up? Do you have DMARC set up? Do you have SPF set up? Do you have a custom tracking link set up or data decay? Do you have a data decay strategy? Do you know you shouldn't be sending any more than 50 emails? You should, the less links, the better, because it leads them outside the inbox, and it essentially increases the odds that they're not going to deliver it. So people, when you look at sequences, like just a sequence, a signature of like, do you have your email in there and your LinkedIn there and your content downloads and it's going to the website? If you have 4 links in there, you just gave your ISP 4 reasons to not deliver that email. If someone doesn't know that setup, and it's just as important, if not more important, than from the numbers view, than knowing your buyer, then it disqualifies them from writing the sequence. So they need to know how many emails is too many, how many can you send, how many calls can you make before you start making those triggers happen. The third piece of this, there's actually 4. The third piece of this is, how well do they know email writing as a craft? So like marketers, for instance, like hypothetically, that's their craft of like, how many words should the subject line be for optimization? How many lines? should the actual email be? How long can the lines be? How many words do you hit before you hit the state of inflection where it's too many or too little? What kind of language do you include? So, like, for instance, acronyms are going to help you. Any kind of odd punctuation, so like ellipses and dot dot dot. People are always like, "Why is Beck dot dot dotting?" And I'm like, "It's because a pattern interrupts and it gets a hold of you." How well do they know the aesthetic of an email? Of there's F-shaped pattern and Z pattern and spotted and layered cake. So like everyone says write in the F-shaped pattern. That's actually the worst pattern to write in. And the quality of the email and the quality of what you're saying causes them the reading pattern, not the other way around. So do they know that? Do they know how short to keep it? Do they know what words and what will draw people in and that they need aesthetically, where they need to put words and where? Of like, I know I will not lead an email with, just checking in, just following up, just circling back. Happy Monday. Hope your kids are safe during these uncertain times. My name is blank. I'm with blank. We help blank do blank. I was really impressed by your profile. I'm like, the amount of people who are trying to sell me email prospecting services, which is wild considering what I do on LinkedIn, is bananas. They're like, I was really impressed by your content and I admire what you have to offer. We hear it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want you dead. You are trying to make this look personalized, which is clearly not. So do they know all of that mechanics in terms of writing? How long should it be? How short should it be? How pattern interruptive should it be? Do you use lowercase? Do you use uppercase? Do you use, there are rules to writing. And if they haven't studied that and they haven't directly looked at the result, the smartest thing that I did as a leader, an SDR leader, was I threw myself into study on emails and the data measure, true data measure. And then the last piece is psychology, not like psych, psychology. How well do they know psychology? Ego states, child ego state, parent ego state, adult ego state, like which one is going into which one, which will trigger which one. So like, for instance, if I were to say, do not push this button, you're like, I want to push it. If I were to like, do not say this, let me know what time works for you. It's small, but it's the effects are clear. They're like, I don't want to let you know. Why? Because you just commanded me to do something. Do they know that? How much have they studied? So like a lot of the email, you lose them from the psych view. A lot of the email, it's from the pattern interrupt view. A lot of the emails because it didn't even show up in their inbox. A lot of the emails because even if all that was clear, they didn't know the buyer, they didn't ask a question. So I'd ask my question, who knows that the best? And then they should be writing the emails for the team as a job. If you have someone, if you have the luxury of having someone to do that, like that's their full-time role, that will help you more than anything. However, I think it's worth mentioning, I liken, which I get one inappropriate comment per session, I liken email writing to kissing. Everyone thinks they're good because they never get the immediate feedback that they suck, right? So like, I'm an awesome kisser. Everyone has an opinion about email, and I mean everyone, much more than cold calling. Cold calling, the person hangs up so they get humbled and they know that they don't know everything. Email, not so much, right? So everyone has an opinion, and I kid you not, I've looked at people in the face over and over and over again. And they're like, well, I don't talk like this. I'm like, well, you're at 0% of quota. So like, however you is what I'm thinking in my head. I would never say that. But it's like, they still have an indignant opinion because they're alive, right? So I would have the person be very intentional of who you are picking for that, on who's actually writing them. And then I would try to, as much as you can, and I would put them on almost a graded perspective of like, if you're over 100% of quota, you can do whatever you want. 75 to 100% of quota, if you're like a below 75 or like 50 to 75, you have to do this amount of emails in our sequences and X amount of emails from whatever you want to do. 50 to 75, it's more in our controlled sequences. 25 to 50, more in our controlled sequences, and under 25, then you full blown have to do our sequences. So it's like you delineate out trust when you can. You're like, it's not that I don't trust you, it's that I'm looking at your numbers and I'm trying to help you do the best possible. So I do this with a lot of, and I'm going to run a little bit over on this one too. I do this with a lot of teams. If I look at their progress, I'm like, let's just let the numbers do the talking. I want you to be able to do whatever you want to do, right? Because it's empowering. However, I have to help you get there. I have to look at your numbers and see from a data perspective, how much do you know? So I would, kind of grade them of like, whoever creates this sequence hub, And again, it's one per content reason, per, like content download is a trigger reason, one per trigger reason. And I would have you have to keep on. I'm only saying this because it's true. My sequences have a minimum, like meaning if you are awake and alive and you log into the sequence and you send it, even if you delete big parts of it, a minimum of a 17% reply rate. That's bananas. You would think everyone's going to send it, right? Nope. Some people are like, well, I don't talk that way. And I'm like, again, you booked one meeting this quarter. Honestly, like, I think you should try something else, regardless of what you do, because what you're doing is yielding zero, right? But that's just how people are. So I would take in the bag that just because a sequence is working does not mean that someone is going to actually use it and send it, right? Because people just have their own opinions there. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was what to measure. Here's what to measure in a rapid fire style: open rate, reply rate, how many emails do they send out per day, how many calls do they make out per day, which sequence are they using, how much and when. A big one is what time of day are they sending, what day of the week. So most people are sending Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. when that's the worst time to send them. So I would craft them Monday and Tuesday. I go into that in one of the other sessions. But Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., 5 minutes before the hour and after the hour, increasing throughout the day and increasing throughout the week is when they would, when they're going to get the best results. So the thing that I would measure is what time of day are they sending? What day of the week are they sending? And I wouldn't look at it in terms of, some people look into the data and they're like, oh, well, this says that the best time back for me is 9 a.m. on Tuesday to send. And I'm like, well, I'm always going to say, let your data do the talking. These are general rules. However, if you're doing something and it's working, but I mean it's working, meaning it's booking meetings that are closing, then I'm like, screw me, who am I? But I would look into these things of like, okay, these are the general rules of what is going to govern and what's going to increase their numbers. But in terms of open rate, reply rate, how many booked meetings are coming per sequence. So for that setup, they'll say, the best time in hours a day, sorry, I didn't finish my thought, is 9 a.m. on Thursday or on Tuesday for me. And I'm like, no, it's telling you out of the hours that you call from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Out of those hours, 9 a.m. is the best hour. So be careful about that. It's not saying that that's the best hour to call. It's saying out of the hours that you are calling, this is the best hour to call. So I would start multi-threading of, what time of day and what day of the week are they sending it. Most reps are going to say, oh, well, no one picks up the phone on Friday. I'm like, no, Brendan, you don't pick up the phone on Friday, which nobody else does, right? Which is part of thus the value. If you did nothing else but just change when you were calling and sending your emails to Friday, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., mark my word, you'll 4x your quota. For like 4x the amount that you were doing before, just because people are in the more right mindset. They're looking for that one last thing to do before they close out the day. And, that's that not super time intensive. And you are that person, you're coming at the right time. So I would look at what time of day, what day of the week, open rate, reply rate, bounce rate, unsubscribe rate, something, booked meeting per sequence. There's usually, because CRM setup, not a clean way to do this. I always had a spreadsheet at minimum. People would be like, oh, well, that's too much time. I'm like, you're talking about, okay, let's say like max, they're booking 30 meetings a month. So you're talking 30 seconds times, 30. But I would say, what sequence do they come from? What step? Was it email? Was it call? What was the email? If it was trigger, what was the trigger? And what was content downloads? What piece of content? What email sequentially? I want to know everything. Another one to measure is reps stop calling on people. They usually drop off around the middle emails 3 and 4. So I would I would think about for the I would measure of and they'll be sneaky about it, but essentially, if you from email 1 to 2 take out the bounces and the unsubscribes and the people who replied, you should have a verbatim. If there was 20% in that bucket, you sent 1,000 to 1,000 people, you should have 800 that are going through step 2. But I would measure what's the dropout. A lot of times you'll see 500 and you're like, well, why is it only 500? Because they manually kicked out 300. So I would just look at it in terms of data of what's happening. Another thing that I would look at is The conversion is a whole different subject for a different time, but the conversion into accepted meeting. Now, I'm very, very visceral on that the accepted criteria should not be up to the whims of the AE, meaning buyer intent or the right person. No, that's based on their ability. They should create buyer intent by finding something the person didn't know, right? But it's how many people hit this criteria of like this level and above, this company level and above. That's what the SDR can control. So I measured that data point, and then I would, as a loose data, closed one on the back end. So again, the reason I'm being loose there is not because I don't care about it. It's because I would, again, you're introducing a lot of repability at that point of did they close? It comes down to the seller. But I would look at how far did this progress? So you know what sequences, especially if you're a full cycle team, what sequences are performing the best for my team and when. I would also look at the level of title that's booking. And I would look at the level of title, level of company it's booking per sequences, just so you can measure of like which sequences are based on the criteria that I need the best sequences to be calling on. Okay, lap 6, and then we close out the pizza pie. Okay, I'm actually going to be tighter on this one. Okay, so like we mentioned, there's a lot of different reasons. That you can, a lot of different reasons that you can essentially call on someone and essentially develop a sequence reason. I am going to have actually, why don't we drop in the chat? We have a resource essentially for all the different sequence reasons, all 139. I'm going to just rattle them off here. But essentially, you've got 4 different categories. You have inbound, true hand raisers, postbound, non-hand raising marketing leads, bridgebound, and you've got 4 categories under that. Sorry, 5 of the market took an action on them, or the market took an action on them, or they took an action, but it's not in relationship to your marketing team. And then cold outbound. So inbound, it's pretty simple. You got 2 people who requested demo and prospects who came in through the chat. Again, the more that you can delineate the reason, the better. Postbound, I have essentially 30 reasons: content downloads, webinar registrants for a company webinar, webinar attendees, webinar registrants for a sponsored webinar. Let's say that you sponsor someone's webinar, webinar attendees and webinar registrants for a sponsored webinar, event registrants for a company event, event attendees for a company event. The tighter you can get on this reason, the more, in the beginning, you start with 3, but then you get closer and closer and closer to the data point. People say like, oh, well, isn't that a pain in the butt? I'm like, at the beginning, right away at the beginning, but like you create the reason, then you reset just the front words of the trigger of like, I noticed you attended an event versus I noticed you registered for an event and didn't attend. Those are 2 different buyer journeys. And then, like you write it, it's like set it and forget it. Event attendees, registrants for a sponsored event, event attendees for a sponsored event, attendees and registrants for a sponsored event. So you have a company event, meaning it's your event versus a sponsored event. Premium account registrants, free trial registrants, blog subscribers, newsletter subscribers, member of a company community. Let's say you have a community and they're a member of that. Members of a sponsored community, you sponsor a community. So let's say Outreach sponsors my community. So members who joined this at the Flip the Script community that they could reach out to. Followers of your company social page, they engage with your company social page. Buyer intent prospects for G2 Trust Radius. Dark funnel prospects was just essentially through cookie trackers. So Bombora or 6 Sense are great examples of that. They viewed your company website. They opened marketing emails aggressively. They clicked through marketing emails aggressively. I would set that at whatever amount you want to, but I'd say 5 or more is what I determine as aggressively. And then you have postbound leads that are sent through sponsored influencers. So for instance, Outreach, thank you, Outreach, wonderful Outreach is sponsoring me for this wonderful event. And so anyone who, let's say, downloaded content or engaged with my company page or are followers of me or, follow me on LinkedIn or engage with me on LinkedIn, you could sponsor or you could sequence all those through to someone who's calling on at Outreach hypothetically. So those are all the postbound ones. I'm going to see how much time I have. I got 402 seconds. So that's postbound, non-hand raising marketing leads. Bridgebound is the biggest category. And bridgebound means, again, they took an action or action happened on them. So the first category is bridgebound based on relationship, meaning they have some kind of relationship with someone you know or engaging with someone you know. So the first is they share a common VC. Let's say you have a common VC backer with this company. So common VC with your company or common VC with your customers. Let's say you have a key customer that they share a common VC with. Again, it's a reason. Now it's a pen, but it's a reason, hypothetically. So then you have your customers referring to the network of my happy customers, inbound referral for my key customers. It's a reason, but it's not often we get it's less often we get those than some other reasons, but it is a reason. Inbound referrals from your C-suite, engage with your C-suite's personal page, inbound referrals from company employees, mutual connections with company employees, inbound referrals from your VC partners, your advisors, your board members, your customer advisors. So basically, and then even within your network, they're currently employed at prospective company, people that currently employed at prospective company, or a past employee of a prospective company. Let's say you're calling into Dell and you know someone who used to work at Dell. Prospects you met at a networking event, they engage with your personal page. So point being, some of them you'll have, some of them you won't. Some of them you'll have more reasons for, some of them you'll have none at all. But these are all reasons that you could write a sequence. And once you write the sequence, then it's over. You set up the trigger, and then it's like, again, there's so many reasons there. But if I don't have an automation trigger, then that is, I'm never going to catch all these. Okay, category 2 of Bridgebound is based on history. This is a huge bucket. So this is, they have some kind of history with you or your company. So people requested a demo, didn't actually schedule one. People agreed to a demo and then no-showed. Prospects who abandoned the chat. Like the amount of people that are just coming to the website and like actually engaging with you that aren't booked because of system is bananas. People who come in who requested a demo who actually get a first meeting with an AE, that number, I kid you not, I shit you not, is 6%. Sometimes it's 4%. Just the people who get to the first meeting because of process. I'm doing another session on that in specific. If that blew you away, the highest I've ever seen is 22.5. By far the outlier. The average is around 9. People who've done it in the past, but they ghosted. People who went with a competitor upon renewal. You can set the trigger of like, they just unfortunately went with blank, but in 11 months, I want to sequence them into a sequence and call them again. They didn't hit ICC size. They didn't hit ICT size. Customers who went to another company. You have a great customer and then they went to another company. So you want to sequence them in of like, that is a huge reason, of executive churn. If they go to another company that's within territory, can you do that can you do that manually? Hypothetically, yes. If I didn't sleep and I had 16 days to the normal one, then I could, but I can't. So automation. The people who open your prospecting emails, that open them aggressively. You received an OO to your prospects email. Like you can sequence back in terms of when they come back from OO. People who and so that's based on history. Based on likely in market is the third category. So these are people who recently purchased, or current customers, or in cycle, or engage with followers of, engage with the adjacent vendor, or engage with the page of, or mutual connections with an adjacent vendor. So this is, they bought skis. Now you think they're going to need boots. They bought, I am not that great at Winter Olympics. You're going to have to, excuse me. They just bought a jacket, a coat. Now you think they're going to need sweatshirts, for instance, or they just bought pants now, or warm socks. Now you think that they probably need a certain type of shoe. So all those for adjacent vendors, and then also competitors, people who are churn customers, competitor. Yes, you can set that up if it's tech. People who are disintegrated their tech, the customers of current competitors that are on their website. People who are in cycle that you hear through word of mouth. Or how about this? If like, you can't tell hypothetically who they're in cycle with, but you can tell who's engaging with their page, or a key person from your competitor's page of like, they're engaging, they're commenting, they're liking. That's a good sign. Sometimes within cycles, if I know I'm going into a competitive deal, I will look at how much are they engaging with the people that I know in the deal, so I can see like how warm are they with them. So you can set up a trigger on that. The last category here is Bridgebound. So that was Bridgebound based on their likely in market. Is Bridgebound based on symptoms or problems. So this is, they have an overt problem that you can track through the market and you can sequence based on. So let's say, companies who are public who miss quota by a certain margin. I could surface I don't know if they need sales training, like sales training, but it's a good guess of like, or you could say like a X amount of percent in decline from year to year. Can I track all of that? No. But I can set a system of optimization, a system internally to where anyone who has that amount of a dip in terms of their fiscal earnings, that it puts people into that sequence. So again, it's getting them to the front door, and then and then the rep is customizing out of the personalization. Companies who, the last one is companies based on firmographics. So companies went public, raised funding, released financial reports, were acquired, merged, are growing significantly, started hiring, moved headquarters, opened new locations, released a new product, released a new feature, released a new integration, made an impactful marketing move. And the last category is outbound. So CXO pass down, you're going to the CXO, of a current company, and you're going after someone else. You're like, I need to get a hold of this person. Here's, hypothetically, what I find, asking a question so you can, it's usually a really impactful play, using groundswell, of like going to people who are looking at you, hypothetically, or engaging with you, and going, up channel. The CXO pass down is more fun, but those are all the ones for outbound. So here's the punchline. There are 139 sequences. It's about setting up the system and optimization for which one is best for your reps in specific. I'm going to put in retrospect what I call the encyclopedia of sales plays, but essentially it's sequence reasons. But here's the key takeaway. You're not going to use all of them. You're not going to use most of them. And hypothetically, everyone would love to call on all these leads, but they can't. So it's using system and using AI to do the dirty work for us of what they can handle, what they can completely take off my plate. I believe that reps need to be involved in adding the personalization. I have heard company after company after company after company say you can personalize at scale, meaning there's no rep involved. I'm like, well, number one, that means that we don't need to hire you, right, of the rep. But number two, it's not about the automation. It's about how can I use this in a way to speed me up. So a lot of sequence creation, the timing, when to do it, when to send it, how close together, a lot of that is science. It's about combining that with how much the rep knows and researching the person. No matter what a platform tells you, hypothetically, they could personalize, which it's never personalization. It's like, you live in in Paris. How are the baguettes? And I'm like, that is not going to help. It's about which reason to include, thing that they did or said and include, and why. That tech cannot do. It can't scour through 5 articles that they wrote, pick out the perfect clip because that will hook to this perfect, thing because of this reason. That is what a rep was responsible for, and that is what a rep should spend their time on. So this is just about enabling them to spend as much time as they can on that and not on list cleaning. So there's a lot of things that you can do from a system perspective. You can use some of these sequences, you can use all of them, you can use none of them. The punchline is the more that you build and the more intentional you are about how you build them, and the more automation that you put into it. Again, like, the reason I'm so passionate here is most people, I know everyone wants to hit quota. That's a fact. People want to hit quota, right? But most of the difference between people who do and don't is system, right? Like my 10 reps versus 75, it wasn't that they were better at selling necessarily. Like you push there. And I'm like, where you really need to invest, the thing that can speed them up is from a system perspective, getting people into the right sequences that you've pre-written 80%. So they add the magic of the 10% on the back end, of the personalization, and hooking it within the question, which I go into personalization at scale, so you can make the most impactful message to the person in front of you. So there's a lot of different pieces that go into it, but it's how do we take out the pieces that we don't have to involve someone in take out as much science as we can and think that through for them so they don't have to, so they can spend all of their calories instead of the outfit that they wear, what block should they go to, and X, Y, and Z, on just once they walk through the door, having an impactful conversation, asking the right questions, and finding things that the person didn't know. That's everything. Thank you so much for being a part of today. So that is everything for day 5 of the Cold Outreach 2026 Olympics. It is turning dusk here, turning dusk here. So I am actually have to get out of the door because I have to go to an event. That's not Winter Olympics. I think it's general sports. Maybe that's biking. I think, but usually they're switching back and forth on putting the different Winter Olympics on different Italia Eurovision sports. So I am very, very excited for the rest of the series we're going to be going into on day 6. If you want to tune back in on day 6, we are going to be covering essentially edge cases for sellers. So this was for prospecting. So we're going to flip back, of course, all of the system to selling tomorrow. So edge, I put edgier cases, but selling to a committee, competitive selling, inbound versus outbound, what's the difference, multi-threading, ghosting, and how to work as a partner and as a pair with your exec and with your and any kind of executive from the outside, and then also a solution engineer, let's say. So when should you involve them, and how much they'd be talking, what questions they'd be asking versus your role in the room. That's everything. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending today, and I will see you tomorrow. And I want to say, I'm just going to say, say too. Say too. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Talk to you tomorrow.